Hello, my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager in SharePoint Engineering. This is the Setup Development Environments section within the Getting Started with SharePoint Framework module. In this module or section, we'll have a look on the needed setup for your computer to get started with SharePoint Framework development. So what are actually the things and steps to complete within your Windows or Mac or Linux computer to get started with SharePoint development? The steps are relatively simple. SharePoint Framework development uses industry standard open source tooling, and these tools are available and relatively easily installable within your machine using internet resources. So what you need to do is install actually Node.js and then a developer editor. In our demos and in our case, we've been using Visual Studio Code, but there are multiple different options available for your development experience. You'll need to also install Yeoman and Gulp, which are the underlying toolings used by the SharePoint Framework development platform. Then you need to install Yeoman template for SharePoint Generator, which is actually bringing you the SharePoint Framework solution structures when you're executing the Yeoman for the templates. And then there are numerous optional tools which you can install and use as part of your development as well. The first thing to install is the Node.js, and you should be installing the Node.js long-term support version, and that has been tested to work properly with SharePoint Framework. If you're using a Mac, it's recommended to use Homebrew to install and manage a Node.js. And you might want to double check that you're running the latest version of NPM if you have already installed Node.js in the past. The easiest way to get started is to go to the Node.js org page and download the needed setup, which will also install NPM for the matching Node.js version. The second thing to notice is to install obviously developer tools. There are multiple different options available. We're only mentioning 4 here, which are relatively common developer code editors for web stack development. Visual Studio Code is growing usage across the different technologies and different platforms. Sublime is a good example, good platform as well, Atom as well, and a WebStorm. It is basically up to you to choose which JavaScript development IDE you want to use. So our tooling, the SharePoint framework, can be done on any of these editors or all of the rest of the developer tool editors for web stack development. What about using Visual Studio 2015 or 2017? Visual Studio does not have a native development experience as JavaScript editors, so the experience is slightly different. The Visual Studio does, however, integrate well on the enterprise development tools. If you're looking into using Visual Studio as your IDE for SharePoint Framework development, we would recommend you to have a look on the Visual Studio 2017 as the platform to use within your development. There is a free version available of the Visual Studio 2017, which is the Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition. And this is the version which you should be maybe looking into unless you already have a Visual Studio license. Installing Yeoman and Gulp can be easily done from the NPM package manager. So the command will be npm install with a g- if you want to install this globally, which would be the typical setup when you're getting started with SharePoint Framework development. Yeoman is the one which is providing your project templates, or it is the project template engine to be precise. And Gulp works as the task manager for your SharePoint Framework solution. SharePoint client-side development tools include a Yeoman generator for creating new SharePoint Framework solutions. And that's after installing the Yo and Gulp, that's exactly what we need to install next. So running npm install with the g- will ensure that you are installing this SharePoint generator globally within your machine. This is, however, a slightly debatable approach as well. So every now and then it might be also useful to have a local version of the generator. Or you might be using Docker or alternative solutions to isolate different versions of the generator. If you are, however, looking into getting started as easily as possible in a clean machine, just npm install with the g-dash will make sure that the Microsoft generated SharePoint will be installed globally within a machine. This generator also contains all of the different things what is needed for SharePoint client-side SharePoint framework's client-side development. It will contain also the workbench and a few other additional tooling, which will then make sure that your development for SharePoint framework is as easy as possible. There are numerous other tools which you could install on your development machine. This is just a subset of selected tools which could be useful when you're doing SharePoint framework development. Fiddler is, for example, a great tool to have a look on what's actually being sent between the browser and the server, so you can easily analyze the traffic, and you can also replay some of the traffic if needed. Postman plugin for Chrome is a pretty much similar kind of a tool as Fiddler. It is also a great tool to play around with the REST APIs and having a look on how the JSONs should be formatted. Commander for Windows is a command line tool, so it actually provides a command line window which has additional capabilities comparing to PowerShell or classic Windows command line experience. Oh my gosh for Mac is a command line tool for Mac. And obviously Git source control tools are great to have if you're planning into contributing back for any of the open source GitHub repositories like the github.com/SharePoint, where you can find countless numbers of samples for SharePoint framework development. Let's have a look on the actual steps to install the needed tools and libraries for your development environment. So we'll quickly walk through all of the steps, all of the setups and installations and configurations which are needed for your environment. That's not too much of a action, so typically you can actually get a clean machine up and running with all of the needed toolings within less than 10 minutes. So let's actually have a look on how do we set up our development environment for SharePoint framework. This is a clean Windows 10 Enterprise Edition hosted in Microsoft Azure. And I haven't actually done any configurations for it. It's plain out of the shelf Windows 10. So we can start from scratch. While we're installing all of this stuff, I'm going to speed up the video for those sections where we need to wait something to complete. You can actually follow up on the progress also from timing, so you can actually know how long does it actually take to set up a development environment for SharePoint framework. Now, let's get actually started by installing a Node.js to our machine. So I'm going to start a browser and let's actually move into the node.js.org, where we're going to then install the Node.js environment. Let me close up the second tab. So what we're going to install is the long-term version. So let's actually run that MSI, and that's going to install Node.js on this environment. So this can be any Windows client or Windows operating system, or it could be just as well a Linux or a Mac operating system where you're installing Node.js. So Node is supported in numerous different operating systems, and you can do development of SharePoint framework in whatever your chosen operating system is. So let me run that, and that's going to start the Node.js installer. Next, let's accept the license agreement, and let's do the default settings to all of these, so we can actually click the install, confirm, and that's going to install the Node.js to the machine. This section is relatively fast, so the waiting times for Node.js installer is relatively low, so you don't actually need to wait that long the Node.js to be completed. And there we go. So now we have Node.js installed on our machine, and that includes also NPM. NPM is the package manager for Node, so we can actually see that one in practice. The easiest way to double check that is to start, for example, Windows PowerShell command window, and then we can do something like, so let's actually go, for example, the root of the machine, and create a folder here. So we can actually isolate what are we doing within here. So let me increase the font slightly because I haven't actually done any configurations on this machine, so you can more easily see what I'm actually doing within the command window. So properties and font, let's do 28. Let's do slightly more of 36. That's absolutely fine as well. So let's have a look on if we can squeeze in the window so you can see what I'm actually doing within the command line. Now, the easiest way to actually see that the Node.js has been installed is, for example, running npm v-v, which will give us the version of the npm which is running within the machine. And now that the npm has been installed, we can use npm then to install all of the other needed setups for our development environment. So let's start by installing yo and gulp, and I'm going to do the -d switch there, which means that I'm going to install these globally within this machine, not just within this folder, which would be one option, but I want to install this globally within the machine, so I don't have to install them one by one for my SharePoint framework solution. And this section will take some time, so we're going to actually speed up the section, so you can we don't actually need to wait everything to get completed. Good. So now the software, the yo and gulp has been installed on this machine as well. So obviously, if we run the yo templates, the yo command will essentially show us what's actually available. We do not have any generators right now available within the machine, and that's what we want to install next. So we want to install the SharePoint framework generator, which we can use for creating or scaffolding our SharePoint framework solution and start then developing on top of the SharePoint framework. So let's actually do that as well. So I'm going to run npm, let's actually go slightly down so you can see what I'm writing, npm at Microsoft/generator SharePoint. And that's going to then start installing the generator SharePoint. And we got a small typo there. So let me actually do it one more time. So here we go. There's our command, and we actually missed the whole install command, which is obviously needed for getting the package installed on the machine. Good, so let's actually execute that one. So that is getting executed. And this installer, this does take again some time to get completed. So let's pause or speed up the video while we're executing the installer commands for SharePoint framework, the yo templates. And there we go. Now the templates have been, the Yeoman templates for SharePoint framework has been installed. So technically we could already run the scaffolding process, but the end result is something which we can't really open, or we could open that one in a notepad, but obviously we want to use a proper editor for doing modern web stack development. So one of the options, there's multiple options, is no doubt the Visual Studio Code. So if I go code.visualstudio.com, that means that I'm actually can download the version for Visual Studio Code from here. So let's actually install that. So download for Windows and install that one. And that's going to be then our development IDE. So let's run that. And that doesn't, the installation for this one doesn't actually take that long either. So let's actually get that one installed. Next, let's accept the agreement. Default settings are just fine. And a few options. I personally like actually these options. So open with code action the Windows Explorer file context menu, and open with code action the Windows Explorer directory context menu. So when you're clicking a folder within the File Explorer, you can choose that, hey, open this folder directly in Visual Studio Code. And that actually increases your productivity quite nicely. And so we can actually check those checkboxes and click next and install. And that's going to then install Visual Studio Code within your machine. Good. Now we have a Visual Studio Code installed. We do not need to launch that right away. So let's actually unclick that checkbox or uncheck that checkbox and click finish, and we're pretty much ready to go. So now you have the basic setup for development. We have Visual Studio Code IDE for the script development, and then you have your host for the local development, which is the Node.js. And also Yeoman templates have been installed, and also the Gulp task manager has been installed. So then it's nothing more than actually creating our solution. So typically you would create your solution in specific folders. So let's do md hello world. So let's go to that hello world folder. There we go. It's obviously completely empty, nothing there. So now if I run yo at Microsoft SharePoint, that's going to execute the Microsoft SharePoint Yeoman templates. In this case, we're going to use the hello world as the solution name. We're going to use the current folder. We can use, doesn't really matter, we can use no JavaScript web framework as a default setting. You can absolutely still associate React or Angular or whatever to your solution after the default scaffolding. React as a default scaffolding or Knockout as a default scaffolding. So let's choose, for example, no JavaScript web framework. Let's use the default settings for your web part and also the web part description. And that's going to then start the actual scaffolding process, and we're going to speed up this process in the video as well. But it doesn't take, it takes a few minutes to complete, slightly depending on the machine and also the network bandwidth. So what happens here is that right now already the basic structure has been created. So you can actually see the create definitions for hello world web part visible in the command window. The additional steps what's now happening is that we're pulling down all the dependent NPM packages which the Visual Studio Framework solutions are using by default. So all of the different NPM packages are getting pulled down from the internet and getting installed on the machine on this particular SharePoint Framework solution folder. And let's again speed up the video to catch up whenever the full installation has been completed. And there we go. Now we have a solution available, solution ready to be extended or tested as such within our machine as well. So let's double check that everything is fine for this setup. So we can easily open up the scaffold solution in Visual Studio Code, first by writing code and dot, which isn't actually there as an associated commandlet right now, but what I could do also, let's do this, and I can absolutely do this one as well. So if when I'm rebooting my machine, then the code will be associated to the basic setup as well. But now in my file explorer, I can right click the machine or the folder and say open in Visual Studio Code. That's one option to open the solution in the machine as well. So there's our Visual Studio or scaffold solution. Let me slightly zoom that so we can see what's actually happening. If we were wondering what was the last step when we were scaffolding the solution. So as part of the scaffolding, as part of the Yeoman template execution, we were asking questions like what is your web part name, and the web part name is actually used within the web part. So we used that as the web part naming in here. It also defines the aliases and the definitions for the web part pre-configured entries file. And this is essentially the information which is visible in the SharePoint UI when you're using the web part. All of the packages which were installed were essentially are in the package JSON, and this is a set of the dependencies and dev dependencies which we need to have to make this work within the machine. And these packages then have alternative dependencies, and we were essentially pulling down all of those packages which we use as part of the SharePoint framework, and those packages which the packages had a dependency as well. And this list is relatively big right now, and we're looking into optimizing that in the future as well. But basically what you're getting is automatically running machine or automatically scaffold solution project for you, and you can actually start development directly within Visual Studio Code. And now if we want, if everything has been set up correctly, we can run gulp serve. But before we do that, let's actually run gulp trust dev cert. which is essentially installing a development certificate within your machine, because by default we are using HTTPS as the channel for testing these client-side web parts. And to be able to use the HTTPS or within your machine, within the local host, we need to have a certificate installed for that one. So when you run that trust dev cert command with gulp, it's going to actually pop up this cert certificate, and clicking yes, that's going to be installed within a machine. You can absolutely uninstall that, and you don't have to use devcert. You can actually use HTTP within the local host if needed as well. But it's convenient because in the SharePoint Online that is using SSL as well. So when you have the devcert available, you don't see any certification or challenges or issues when accessing the web part, for example, in an online workbench. But now if we do gulp serve, it will actually start the solution and the basic local host workbench, and it will show us the basic web part, which is available as well. So Node.js is accessing, and that's fine, and we can actually see our custom web part, which was just created using that scaffolding, the hello world web part here, and you can see that it's working, and I can modify description, which is also getting reflected on the UI of that web part. So all good, we are absolutely ready to go within this machine for the development as well. So it's nothing more than essentially going back to the Visual Studio Code and start modifying the code which was created. For example, modifying the web part UIs and stylings and all of that as you move along. But that's it for this demo. So we went through essentially how to install or how to create your development environment for a clean Windows 10 machine. We installed Node.js, we installed Visual Studio Code, then we installed Yo, Gulp, and Yeoman templates for SharePoint framework. And after that, we're pretty much ready to go for development. And that's it for this section. So we went through the required setup for your computer to get started with SharePoint Framework development. If you're looking into more details around the SharePoint Framework development and all of the other SharePoint Online development options, we would highly recommend to have a look on the SharePoint Patterns and Practices initiative. This is an open source initiative which is coordinated by the SharePoint engineering, but we work together with the community members to provide code samples and solutions, reusable components, guidance documentation. And we do have multiple community calls and monthly community calls as a summary on what has happened within the SharePoint development for past month. The areas which the SharePoint PMP concentrates on is the SharePoint Framework, SharePoint Adding Model Development, Microsoft Graph, and Office 365 APIs. AKMS SharePoint PMP is the easiest address to remember, where we have a list and link of all of the resources which are available. Thank you for watching this video.